Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, March 24th. Tonight, the pressure is on for Canada to increase its defense spending at a meeting of NATO leaders in Brussels. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says leaders have agreed to present plans by June on investing billions of additional dollars into their respective militaries. At a news conference after NATO and G7 meetings, the Prime Minister said Canada would increase defense spending, but declined to share specifics. Canada currently spends about 1.39% of its GDP on defense. However, NATO has a 2% target. Canada also started talks today with the UK to finalize a formal free trade agreement. Britain's trade minister says she hopes her country can do this within a year. UK Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan announced the formal start of the talks with Canada today, with Canadian counterpart Mary Ng. Britain and Canada have already negotiated an interim trade agreement. This was to replace the broader Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, that Canada negotiated with the European Union. After Brexit, the UK was forced out of CETA. To the East Coast now, where Newfoundland and Labrador's energy minister says he expects opposition to Equinor's Bay du Nord oil project. But Andrew Parsons believes the project meets environmental standards and should be approved. He says he doesn't think the deal between the federal Liberals and the NDP will have any effect on the impending decision about the project. Federal NDP environment critic Laurel Collins released a statement last night. It said it will be difficult for the Liberals to justify approval of the project given their climate commitments. Well, next door in Quebec, Premier François Legault says the new alliance between the federal Liberals and the NDP is going to trigger a confrontation with the provinces, particularly around healthcare. Mr. Legault made the comments in reaction to the agreement announced this week that would see the Liberals work with the NDP on several priorities. This includes a dental care program for low-income Canadians and national pharmacare. But Mr. Legault says both of those potential programs fall under exclusive provincial jurisdiction. He says the Liberal-NDP alliance, quote, will hit a wall if it tries to tell Quebec how to spend federal health transfers. Turning to the prairies, where a contentious vote to determine the fate of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's role as head of the UCP has been changed from an in-person vote to mail-in ballots. Party President Cynthia Moore says the change is needed. This is because of an unexpected crush of people signing up to vote on April 9th in Red Deer on whether Mr. Kenney should remain the Conservative Party leader. If he doesn't get more than 50% support in the review, a leadership race must be called. Political rival Brian Jean says the change is a travesty and violates party rules. In Ontario, the New Democrats have given the boot to a longtime MPP. This was after he was found to be a member of an Islamophobic Facebook group. The party says during the pre-election vetting process, it was discovered that Paul Miller was a member of the Worldwide Coalition Against Islam. Mr. Miller has pushed back, saying the party's claims were false allegations and that he is consulting with a lawyer to contest them. Mr. Miller has held the Hamilton East Stony Creek riding since 2007, and he says he intends to run as an independent in the June 2nd election. Experts say the legacy and language around masks will be long debated after the COVID-19 pandemic recedes. University of BC professor Sarah Otto says not since the two-piece swimsuit was introduced over 75 years ago has such a small piece of cloth produced such a polarized debate. Still, she says masks remain one of the most important layers of protection to help slow the spread of the virus. The University of Toronto's Roger McIntyre, a psychiatry and pharmacology professor, says masks have been politicized and the pandemic has eroded the trust in public health officials. The experts agreed that the message around mask wearing could have been better communicated. All right, staying in Toronto now, as the city's executive committee will soon review a 10-year proposed plan for reconciliation with its Indigenous residents. The city says the 2022 to 2032 Reconciliation Action Plan is aimed at healing the many traumas Indigenous people have suffered. The committee will review the proposed plan, which includes 28 different actions like supportive housing, next Wednesday, and the report will be considered by City Council the following week. Turning to Canada's men's soccer team, which is playing Costa Rica in a CONCACAF qualifier tonight. Canada's national men's team, which last played in a World Cup in 1986, is unbeaten so far during the qualifying campaign. All right, when we return from break, we'll take a look at philanthropy and investing. We'll have a conversation with Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities, up next. Stay with us. Billionaire philanthropist Mackenzie Scott revealed that she has donated nearly $4 billion to 465 nonprofits in a new blog post on Wednesday. This confirms the gifts that the groups have been announcing on their own for months. The announcement brings Ms. Scott's publicly disclosed donations to more than $12 billion since 2019. Meanwhile, amid the ongoing war in Ukraine and the third year of the pandemic, charitable giving has become an important topic among those wanting to help. Joining us now to give us an idea of how investors can give back during these stressful times is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Always great to be here, Nima. Thanks for having me.
Always great having you, Brendan. Today we're talking about philanthropy. So regardless of how it's done, it's so important to give back, especially during these hard times, Brendan. So what would be your advice to investors who are thinking about giving back at this time?
I think much like accumulating wealth, one should look to be giving away not just at this time, but at all times. As a carpenter out of Nazareth said, the poor you will always have with you. So there will always be a need to do something. But from the investor's point of view, from the donor's point of view, I think it is very psychologically helpful to be always giving something just that you would notice it, whether it's 10% or whatever the number is that you'll just sort of notice, to be giving away on a constant basis. I think that is very helpful psychologically to be on the giving side because you're going to be better off as a giver than a taker. And there are always going to be needs for it.
All right, Brendan. Well, when it comes to giving, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of money. So since we're talking about investors, is there any way to maybe donate stocks?
Oh, yes, particularly in Canada. I think the Mackenzie Scott example is very much south of the border. But here in Canada, you can donate stock in kind. That is to say, as is. You don't have to sell the stock first. You can actually donate it to the charity in the form that it already is. And the beauty of doing that, at least for the last number of years in Canada, is there's no capital gains tax. So if you've bought a stock at $1 and it's now worth $10, it's not as though you have to pay the $9 in capital gains or the tax on the $9 in capital gains. Rather, you can make the full $10 donation, get a tax receipt for the full $10, and have no capital gains tax on the gain. So it's been a very good way to fund up charities and encourage people to give. So it's been a nice rule change. It's been quite a few years that it's been that way, but it's well worth doing for investors. Mutual funds apply the same way.
Sounds quite worth it, Brendan. Are there any other benefits for the stock donor when it comes to this?
Well, again, I think as I was stumbling along and saying earlier, was that if you're constantly in the mode of giving, it allows one to think more expansively. If one holds on to everything tight, the things tends to slip through one's fingers. It's true of money, it's true of almost anything. So if you're willing to be a bit expansive and find ways to match up where your heart is, where your conscience leads you with the actual financial contribution, and it can be also in terms of time and expertise, but again, as that same carpenter out of Nazareth said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So if you're giving money to something, you're going to be supportive of it. And if you're helping people, that does wonders for one's own sense of well-being.
All right, Brendan. Well, we know you would love to speak to charities about increasing donations through stock donations. So how can charities go about doing that? What would you say to them?
Well, it's not, first off, I think you have to make your donors aware of that if you're a charity. And then work with a securities firm to set up an account. And many securities firms like ours will either do the stock donation and liquidation on a deeply discounted basis, or in our case, we will do it for charities for no cost. So if a charity wants to take in-kind donations, they need to let their donors know about that. And then if they want to make a donation, the securities firm can coordinate with the donor's brokerage account and make all that happen. It's just paperwork that we can look after.
All right, Brendan, a quick 30 seconds left here, but any last messages for our investment viewers looking to give back today?
I think one needs to follow one's heart and think about consciously, not just when you're dead, and people write these things in one's will, in their wills, and that's a good thing to do. And if you're going to put a charity in your will, it's really good to let the charity know that they actually plan around these sort of things, but to be doing it on a constant basis, because if you are in the mode of giving, it makes one feel good about oneself.
Welcome back. Up next, Forum Daily's Market Update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, markets are moving higher today, following a pullback yesterday, with major indices down by about 1% on average. That was yesterday. But we are seeing the markets moving higher, led by industrial metals, also precious metals, interestingly, with gold up by about 1.4%. You're also seeing energy stocks help to move the market higher as well. Crude is, however, trading a little bit lower, but that follows a 5% jump yesterday, so maybe just a little bit of a breather here. We're also seeing some strength in the semiconductor space today. I would, however, point out with the fear of rising rates, we are in fact seeing the home builders under some pressure. They are underperforming the broader market. There's, of course, concern about pressure on mortgage rates and mortgage applications. Stepping back for a moment, what's the market narrative going on right now? Well, it really is moving from the bullish story to the bearish story. So let's start with the bullish call being made right now. And that is that we've had oversold conditions. Remember that the market had pulled back by about 15 to 20% in bear market territory for some stocks and some indices. So with oversold conditions, the technicals were telling people to buy. So you did have a little bit of a buy the dip mentality going on over the past number of trading days. In fact, 6 out of 8 have been up. You've also got, of course, improving COVID trends. And on the bullish call, they're saying, look, we've got strong corporate as well as consumer balance sheets. Now, the bearish call, which is also very much front and center and very real, the concern, of course, is what happens next with Russia and Ukraine. Also, top of mind, will the U.S. Federal Reserve make a policy mistake by tightening too fast and causing a recession? And also, of course, look no further on that front than the yield curve in the United States. You're seeing the 2-year yield move higher, the 30-year-old not much movement there. In other words, the yield curve is kind of flattening. And we all know to look to the fixed income or bond investors to see what they believe will be the outcome of the US Fed tightening cycle. And right now, they're kind of indicating that they're pretty concerned that forward growth will in fact be slow and maybe there could be a recession. All of that, of course, is the bearish call. Add to that, of course, we've got high inflation stemming from the Ukraine-Russia war, of course, tight supply in the oil market, and fertilizer costs, the input costs that are also increasing, which will cause food costs to increase. Lastly, I just point out on the bearish call, think about deglobalization. We heard reports this week that Saudi Arabia is thinking to price oil not in US dollars, but in renminbi. Why would they do that? Two ideas and thoughts here. One is that they're not keen on the U.S. policies in their region, and also that the way the West and the democracies have treated the Russian oligarchs with a swipe of a pen, that they can freeze their assets and U.S. dollar assets, might make them want to move into renminbi. So that's a developing story. We'll watch that pretty closely. On the economic front, mixed data out of the United States today. Initial jobless claims fell to the lowest level since 1969, so that's obviously a positive. Manufacturing data beat, but durable goods was worse than expected. And it's important to keep in mind as well, Fed speak. And the U.S. Fed presidents that we've been hearing this week are all calling for probably about 7 rates this year. Away from that, we're continuing to keep our eyes on the Russia-Ukraine sanctions. I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that today with various meetings between President Biden and NATO. And then also, as we take a look at some stocks to watch as well, we are looking at Uber. They are adding New York taxis to their app. And KB Homes in the housing department, they did miss on their first quarter delivery. So a little bit of disappointing news there. Rounding out the picture here, take a look at the TSX. It is mildly higher today. Keep in mind, WTI is trading a little bit lower, as I mentioned. That can weigh on some of the stocks, but the energy sector is still an area where investors want to play. Canadian dollar is higher versus the US dollar. And on the 52-week high front, a couple names I wanted to point out. ARC Resources on the TSX, that's up 132%. Canadian Utilities up 15%. Precision Drilling up 241%. Again, past 52 weeks. And Stelco up by 125%, a Canadian steel company, which actually got upgraded to overweight from neutral over JP Morgan. They are seeing some broad upside for steel companies, steel equities, and they've also actually raised the price of Stelco, the price target, to $62 from $48. So certainly a lot going on in the market, Nima. Most important, the price of oil and inflation expectations. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Lots to keep our eyes out for. Catherine, thanks for that. That was Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops here. Be sure to tune into her show. All right, up next, we've got more news from around the world only on Forum Daily, so stay with us. We'll be right back. NATO leaders have agreed to send equipment to Ukraine to help protect it against a chemical weapons attack. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance is stepping up its defenses against chemical and nuclear weapons. This is in response to rising concerns that Russia might use the weapons as the war enters its second month. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other leaders meeting today in Brussels have also agreed to deploy 4 new battle groups in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. 4 other battle groups are already stationed in the Baltic states and Poland. Meanwhile, the UN General Assembly has approved resolution blaming Russia for the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and urges an immediate ceasefire. This while representatives from 38 nations met in The Hague today, where they offered money, technology, and expertise to support the International Criminal Court's investigation in Ukraine. British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says the meeting sends a message to Russia that political leaders and military commanders will be held to account if they commit war crimes. This comes as UNICEF reports that more than 4.3 million Ukrainian children have been displaced since Russia launched its invasion on February 24th. That is half of all the children in the country. UNICEF says more than 1.8 million children have crossed into neighboring countries. This comes as refugees. 2.5 million of them are displaced inside of Ukraine. 78 have died and 105 have been injured. Amid this Russian invasion, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says he's going to stay in his post until the end of next September. He's agreed to stay on for an extra year to help steer the military alliance through the crisis in Ukraine. Mr. Stoltenberg was appointed as the next head of Norway's central bank back in February and had expected to start his position in December. A key Russian ally is rejecting accusations of helping Russia spread disinformation over Washington's involvement in Ukraine. China's pushback came while echoing Moscow's baseless claims about secret American biological warfare labs in Ukraine. A foreign ministry spokesperson claimed the international community continues to have grave concerns about such accusations. This despite rebuttals from independent scientists. Beijing has also claimed to be neutral when it comes to the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, but has refused to criticize the Kremlin's invasion. Meanwhile, tensions in the east continue to rise. Pyongyang has fired possibly its biggest yet intercontinental ballistic missile toward the sea. This means it's raising the ante in a pressure campaign aimed at forcing the U.S. and other rivals to accept it as a nuclear power and remove crippling sanctions. The launch extended the North's recent run of tests this year, which have ranged from ICBMs to smaller projectiles. South Korea criticized North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for breaking a self-imposed moratorium on tests, and the country responded with live-fire drills of its own missiles launched from land vehicles, a ship, and aircraft. Turning to East Africa now, where the Ethiopian government on Thursday announced what it called an indefinite humanitarian truce in its war-ravaged Tigray region. It says the action was necessary to allow unimpeded relief supplies into the area. A government statement urged fighters loyal to Tigray's fugitive leaders to desist from all acts of further aggression and withdraw from areas they have occupied in neighboring regions. Ethiopia's government has faced growing international pressure to ease restrictions on the flow of humanitarian aid into the northern region of Tigray. Energy prices continue to skyrocket in Europe, and the German government is announcing a package of measures to help cushion the blow to consumers. The measures include fuel subsidies, discounted public transport, tax benefits, and additional support for the poorest. Senior lawmakers unveiled the measures on Thursday after lengthy haggling between the three parties that make up the governing coalition. Rising energy costs due to the war in Ukraine and sanctions imposed on Russia have caused significant price pain for companies and consumers across Europe in recent months. We end today's newscast with a new study from Dalhousie University that has found that apples have changed quite a bit over the years of domestication and breeding. Associate Professor Sean Miles and his research team discovered that cultivated apples were 3.6 times heavier than the wild ancestral species modern varieties are derived from. Modern apples are also now about half as acidic and far less bitter than the ancient species. And historical records show recent efforts at apple breeding over the last 200 years have created apples that soften less during storage. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.